Hi, welcome to Father Games. Today I'm going to be going over my top 10 solo board games. So up to about 2 years ago, I never played a board game solo. I figured board games are meant to be played with other people, and that was kind of the only way I'd ever play them. But I wanted to see what all the hype was about. So about 2 years ago, I got into my first solo board game, and I've kind of never looked back. Now the majority of games I do play are solo, and they're just easier to get to the table, and a lot of games do work better as a solo game. So this is a list I'm hoping to do at least once a year, but as of right now, this is my current top 10 solo board games. So with that, let's take a look at number 10. So my number 10 is a large dungeon crawler, and this is Bardsung. So a lot of people have complained that Bardsung is kind of grindy and repetitive, and I 100% agree with that. And I'll take it one step further to say that the tiles needed a bit of work. A lot of dungeon crawlers, the tiles are amazing and just beautifully designed. In Bardsung, I thought they were not the best looking, and I didn't like that you needed a tile index to be able to tell which tile was which. But despite all those negatives, what Bardsung is very easy to set up, very easy to get to the table, and very, very fun to play. With my job, it's very sporadic. I get a lot of overtime comes up where I have to work 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. And that may seem like a lot, but a lot of that time I am on call, just on site on call. But either way, during those times, I'm not home very much. And if I do play a game during the week, I want something that is quick to play, quick to set up, and doesn't require a ton of thought revolving around every decision that you have to make. And for me, Bardsung was a game that filled that void. It's a lot of fun to play, and there is strategy to it. I don't want to make it seem like there's no strategy at all, but it's very quick to set up. Typically, you're going to be setting up one tile at a time, and then when you explore to a new tile, you're going to be resolving the conditions on the aspect and dungeon cards that you've drawn for the new tile. So you don't have to set up very much initially, and the actions are very easy to figure out. It's mostly revolving around dice rolling. So not too much depth in the thinking and the decisions that you have to make. There is decisions to be made on the cards that you draw, but that's kind of the extent of it, or what enemies to attack and where to move and stuff like that. But the decisions aren't super difficult, so it is a game that is definitely easy to get to the table. And towards the end of last year, I found myself playing this quite a bit just because of my work schedule. It was a game that kind of fit my lack of time very, very well. So the best part about Bardsung was the boss battlers, in my opinion. With the boss battles, you're going to be shuffling the boss's attacks into the marching order, and you're going to be resolving those attacks one at a time, and you're going to see the attacks as they come up. You're going to know what to expect and kind of strategize around kind of what attacks are coming up. And to defeat the boss, you're going to be flipping these attacks over once you damage it, and then eventually removing those attacks from the marching order. The enemy's going to attack less as the battle goes on because you're going to be removing those attacks from the marching order. That was by far my favorite part of the game, but there's a lot to love with all the aspects of this game, with the standard crawl where you're trying to get from one tile to the far edge of the map, and the other ones that they threw in there. There is a large variety of enemies and different things that you're going to be fighting, and the story, I found there was just enough to keep you interested, but not be too much where you're reading tons and tons of text. And the voice narration was also very well done with the Foreteller app. It's something that I'm really glad they added in there as well. So Bardsung definitely isn't for everyone. There definitely is negatives, but it is a game that I really enjoyed at least. That is my number 10, Bardsung. So my number 9 is a very popular exploration game. This is Sleeping Gods. So in Sleeping Gods, you are a crew of 9 on board the Odessa, and you're going to be exploring new locations, completing quests, fighting unique enemies, and trying to complete the campaign. So in this game, I love that you had the option to go wherever you wanted. There's no kind of map, or well, there is a map, but there's no kind of guide that you have to go this way, you have to go over here. It's like you can do whatever you want. And I thought it was amazing that despite having free range to go wherever you wanted, the game still progresses. You still get quests, and they're still getting completed as kind of the game goes on, and the campaign can still come to an end. The reason this is lower on my list is I didn't particularly love the combat. It was unique, where you're going to be covering up symbols on the enemies that you're fighting, and to cover up all their hearts, that's how you defeat them. But you also want to cover up different attacks that they're going to be counterattacking you with. It was unique. I just didn't particularly like it too much. For whatever reason, I thought it was one of the weaker parts of the game. But the best part is just the quests and being able to go wherever you want, and just the stories and discoveries that you're going to make as the campaign goes on. I thought was amazing. Another reason it is lower is the fact that you have to control 9 characters at once. There's not a whole lot that you have to do with each character to control them, but you do have to keep them all fed, all alive, and know kind of their kind of equip them with weapons and stuff like that. You have to know a little bit about each character, and it can be a lot having to control that many at once. The new one coming out this year, I think you only have to control 5 characters, so I think that'll be drastically improved upon on the next one. But either way, this one is amazing. It's such a fun game, and I can see why I got such high praise from so many people. So that is my number 9, Sleeping Gods. My number 8 is probably the most unique game on the list. This is Aetherfields. So Aetherfields is by Awakened Realms, and anyone who knows them knows that they have very grand, large scope games, very unique designs, and amazing quality miniatures and components. Aetherfields is no exception, and I thought it was their most ambitious game. In Aetherfields, you're in the dreamscape world, and you don't know how you got there, you don't know what's going on, and you're trying to figure out how to get out of this dream world. And then after each dream that you're going through, you're going to be going to this map, and then you're going to be going around this map, completing slumbers, which are just smaller dreams, and unlocking upgrades and keys that you're going to use to unlock more dreams later on. So my favorite part about this game was the dreams and how unique each one is. The amount of unknown of what to expect with each dream I thought was amazing. There's so many different dreams. They all look so different from each other, and they all play very, very differently. The reason it is lower on my list is I found the combat and just the turns in general lacked a little bit of depth, where you're just going to be playing cards, and you're mostly just going to be playing cards, trying to match symbols on the cards, get enough of one type to do the action that you want to take. So I felt that there could have been more depth of that, but the unlocks and the amount of mystery and unknown with each stream and each slumber and kind of everything in the game, I thought that part was absolutely amazing. But the fact that the gameplay itself wasn't as good as it could be, that's why it was lower on my list. So this was one of my most anticipated games of all time. It didn't quite live up to my expectations, but either way, it is a game I'm constantly coming back to, and there's so many secrets and so many unknowns to be discovered, and it's one that I really have been enjoying. So that is my number 8, Aetherfields. So my number 7 is the only game on the list that you need an app to be able to play, and this is Destinies. So Destinies is an exploration game where you're going to be going tile to tile, discovering new locations, interacting with locals, and fighting enemies, all to uncover your destiny and to complete the objectives for each scenario. Each scenario is going to make up a campaign, and you're going to play through these one at a time, and they're going to kind of build into a campaign. So Destinies was a lot of fun to play. In the solo mode of the game, there's 2 different ways you can play. You have one mode where you have free range and no time limit. You can kind of do whatever you want, try to complete the objectives and the scenario the best way possible. And then there's also the timed mode, which is the way that I played, where you have a limited number of turns and you have to kind of find the right place to go and interact with the right things to unlock more turns. So you're constantly working against the clock, and it's a very stressful way to play. Every dice roll had a lot of tension, as they're very, very important to be able to kind of complete the objectives that you're trying to achieve. And because you have limited turns, it's very, very stressful. So that is such a fun way to play. And I like that this game also does work well with low player counts. You can only go up to 3 players, but it does work well with other players, but it is a great solo game as well. The reason it is lower on my list is I found the replayability to not be quite as high as other games. There's only, I believe, 5 scenarios in the base game, and then 4 of those make up a campaign, and then you have one kind of one-off scenario. It's about 2 hours per scenario, and once you've beaten all 5, there's kind of no reason to go back and play it again. At least I didn't find it was. So because of that, I found the replayability to be kind of low. There is a lot of expansions. There's a new one coming out this year, so that kind of keeps the excitement for the game and keeps the game interesting, and maybe over a given amount of time you could go back and rebeat some of the scenarios. But at least for me, I found the replayability to be a little bit low. That's why it's lower on my list. But it is such a fun game. It is very heavily involved around dice rolling and getting successful rolls for the interactions that you're having throughout the game. So it's a very, very unique game, one I constantly enjoy, and one I'm really looking forward to playing more when the new expansion comes out this year. So that is my number 7, Destiny. When I was going through my list, I was looking at my number 6. I was trying to figure out reasons why it's not higher on my list. And the only reason I could come up with is that I like the other 5 games better than it. There's nothing wrong with this game. It's a lot of people's number 1 solo game. It just wasn't mine. But it is such a good game. My number 6 is Spirit Island. So in Spirit Island, you are spirits of the island, and you're working against these invaders that are exploring, building, and ravaging the island, kind of breaking down the island. At the start of each turn, you're going to choose a ability to use, and then you're going to choose a number of power cards to play. If the cards are fast, they're going to activate at that point in the round, And if they're slow, they're going to activate after the explorers have had a chance to ravage the land, build, and explore new lands. So there is a back and forth of you and the explorers having their turns. There's a lot of strategy on what cards to play, whether they're fast or slow, and how you can mitigate the amount of damage that these explorers are going to ravage on your land. It can be a little bit frustrating as you're getting rid of these explorers and then they just keep popping up again and again like a problem that just can't be solved. It can be a little bit frustrating that way, but that is part of the fun on maximizing your turns, looking ahead to future turns and planning for that on how to keep these explorers off the island as much as possible. So you're going to be working to cause fear, and then the win conditions are going to change depending on how much fear these enemies have. Such a unique game. I love the asymmetry. Every spirit works completely different from each other, and there's so many to choose from. There's also a list of scenarios and a list of adversaries that you can be playing against if you get tired of playing just the base way. And then there's also a large number of expansions as well, and they add all new spirits and all new abilities and all new things. There's so much to this game. There's so much variety, and it's such a fun game. It's very unique from any game on this list. It's one I constantly come back to, and I like that it is just one-off scenarios. You can just, or one-off games. You can just play it, clean it up, and you don't have to keep it set up. Kind of keep your campaign cards out to the side, and it makes it a game that you can get to the table very frequently. So again, I don't really have any reasons why it's not higher on my list. It is such a good game. If you haven't played it, definitely check it out. That's my number 6, Spirit Island. So my number 5 is the first game I've ever played by Chip Theory Games. It's also my favorite game that they come out with. This is Cloudspire. So Cloudspire is a tower defense game where you are working against other factions and you're trying to destroy another faction's fortress. You're going to have minions and you're going to have heroes. The minions are on a predetermined type of move, so you can kind of plan ahead where you and your enemies' minions are going to be moving to plan, which ones to use and how to use them. And then there's also heroes that kind of have free range depending on the terrain conditions, and they can kind of go wherever they want. And then you're also going to be building spires that are going to be kind of working to defend against enemies, and you can also upgrade your fortress from a large list of upgrades. One thing I like about this game is the variety. Every faction is completely different from each other. Each faction has its own fortress with its own upgrades that are completely unique, a large list of upgrades to choose from, and each faction has its own minions and heroes that also work completely different from each other. And there's also a large list of landmarks and upgrade tiles that you can get as well that drastically change the game and are completely different from each other. So the variety in this game is amazing. It does make the learning curve a little bit high, as you have to kind of know what each faction does to be able to work against them, but it's part of what I liked about this game, that every faction works completely different. The reason it is lower on my list is because I think it works best as a 2-player game. In the solo mode of the game, you are working through a campaign, and you're going to be going through objectives on that campaign, and it removed the event deck, which I thought was one of the best parts of the game, and instead replaced it with event dice that you're going to be rolling, and that whatever you roll is going to determine the event each round from a list of choices on the chosen scenario. So because they removed the event deck, I thought that was one of my favorite parts of the game. It kind of made it less enjoyable, but I like that there's a campaign. I think it is a great game as a solo game, but I think it works best as a 2-player game. But either way, this game is definitely worth the time investment to learn and the cost of the game. If you haven't played it, definitely check it out. That's my number 5, Cloudspire. So my number 4 is also by Awakened Realms. This is Tainted Grail. Tainted Grail is an exploration game where you're going to be going map tile to map tile, discovering new locations, fighting enemies using a combat deck, and also using a diplomacy deck to try to get out of diplomatic situations. This game features a large campaign book where you're going to be making choices, taking off boxes based on your decisions, and these decisions are going to drastically affect how the game plays out. So this game was the game I played the most out of any game on this list. I played over 60 hours on this game, and the reason it's not number 1 is because it is out of those 60 hours, I didn't enjoy every bit of it because it is frustrating at times. It can be grindy, it can be repetitive. These menhirs are going to keep the places around it lit, and you have to constantly go back paying resources and food to keep these menhirs lit. And it can be a bit of a grind because food and all these other resources are hard to come by, and if you have to constantly go back, pay them to just keep the places around you available, it can be a little bit frustrating. That is something that is improved upon on the new one coming out later this year, hopefully this year. But as far as this one goes, that was my big negative and why it's not higher on my list. But the story in this game is absolutely fantastic. The combat was amazing. It was very unique. You have your deck of combat cards, but there's a lot of strategy on when to play them, because after you attack, the enemy's going to counterattack, and depending on how much damage you dealt to the enemy is what attack they're going to do back to you. So it's not always advisable to deal a bunch of damage early on. Sometimes you want to damage an enemy a little bit at a time and save up your attacks to skip certain counterattacks that they're going to get to do back. So the strategy around that and the diplomacy deck I thought was really, really good, and the story was one of the best out of any game I've ever played, which is why it's so high on my list. But the fact that it is grindy, it is a bit repetitive, kind of brought it down a few numbers on the list. But if you haven't played this game, I do highly recommend it. It's my favorite game Awakened Realms has come out with so far. It's such a good game. Definitely check it out if you haven't. That's my number 4, Tainted Grail. Number 3 is the biggest game on my list. This is Aeon Trespass Odyssey. So Aeon Trespass Odyssey has 3 parts of the game. Each part is massive and completely different from each other. You have the voyage phase, where you're going to be going around with this large ship called the Argo. You're going to be going map tile to map tile, discovering new locations, making technology upgrades and discoveries, and building new weapons, and trying to get enough tokens put on your campaign tile to unlock the next part of the campaign. Then you have the adventure phase, where you're going to be reading from this large adventure book, where you're going to be making a bunch of choices throughout the game, and each choice is drastically going to affect how the game plays out. Then you have the battle phase, where you're constantly going to be putting this battle mat on the board, and you're going to have 4 of these large titans trying to take down an even bigger primordial. You're going to have to use these 4 characters together to try to take down this large primordial using equipment and upgrades and things that you found throughout the voyage and adventure phase. So this was my most anticipated game of 2022. It is such a good game. It is one I continually playing. It's the one I'm playing probably the most out of anything right now. The reason it is lower is I found the adventure phase and the voyage phase work best as a solo game, as the choices, are all your own. Everything you do is totally up to you. You don't have to have someone else in the group kind of bouncing ideas off each other. I found that works best as a solo game or in the solo mode, but I found the battle phase can be quite overwhelming playing it by yourself. You have to control 4 characters, and you have to know every keyword, every ability, every weapon, everything about each character you have to know, and you have to always be using to your advantage to be able to take down this primordial, which you also have to know all the abilities and all the kind of movements and keywords on the primordial as well. So there is a lot to know. There's a lot to keep in mind at all times. And unlike Sleeping Gods, there is a lot for each character, and it can be overwhelming to kind of have to do all of that yourself. There's a lot of upkeep and a lot of just a lot of decisions and a lot of reading from a very, very large rulebook. But despite that, it is definitely doable as a solo game. I am playing it as a solo game, and it's been very, very enjoyable so far. But because it can be a little bit overwhelming at times, that kind of brought it down from potentially being higher on my list. But either way, if you haven't played this game, I definitely recommend, if you can get a copy, to check it out. Such a fun game, one that requires a lot of upkeep and a lot of stuff to be left out to the side. As you can see behind me, it takes up a ton of space just to keep everything set up and to keep everything kind of out for your campaign. But it is totally worth all the effort you have to put into it. Such a fun game. Definitely play it if you haven't. That's my number 3, Aeon Trespass Odyssey. My number 2 is also from 2022. This is Burn Cycle. So Burn Cycle is set in the future, hopefully a future that doesn't actually happen, but in this game you are robots, the humans are bad, and you are outnumbered and working against the humans to try to infiltrate the corporations and fight the CEOs on the network. So this is also by Chip Theory Games. I do like Cloudspire a little bit better overall, but I found this one works better as a solo game, which is why it's higher on this list. I found that the higher player counts, the game can drag on very, very long, and I found this works best as a solo or maybe a 2-player game. But either way, this is such a unique game. You're going to be moving around this board with your robots, trying to be undetected as much as possible, trying to complete one of the many given scenarios. I like that this game wasn't a campaign game as well. While I do like campaign games, I like that, I don't have to keep everything set up to the side, as I have so many campaign games on the go right now. I like that this one, you can set up, you can play it, you can clean it up after, and you're done. You don't have to leave everything kind of set up to the side. So I also like that the variety in this game was absolutely incredible. There is 24 scenarios to choose from in the base game, and depending on what bot you're using, it's going to drastically change how each scenario plays out, as each bot is completely different from each other with its own upgrades, its own abilities, and then each bot has a reverse side, which is going to be the command module, depending on which one you choose, and that command module which is kind of like your heart or your hard drive, the one that's keeping everyone alive, that bot is going to be different depending on which one you choose. They're all completely different from each other. It makes the variety and the replayability in this game absolutely incredible. And then there's also captains. There's different captains that you can be playing against, and then each captain is also going to drastically change how each scenario plays out. The variety in this game is incredible, and then there's also expansions if you want to add even more variety to it. There's another one coming out this year. They don't really need any more expansions, at least in my opinion, because the variety in the base game alone was absolutely incredible. It's such a good game. The quality of components is what you come to expect from Chip Theory games. The gameplay itself does take a bit of getting used to, as it is so unique from kind of any other game, but it is well worth the time investment to learn the rules and to set up and play the game. This is such a fun game. It's a game I'm constantly coming back to. So that's my number 2, Burn Cycle. My number 1 is a game I put off getting for years and years. I didn't think it looked very fun, and I was very, very wrong on that. My number 1 is Mage Knight. Mage Knight is an exploration game where you're going to be going tile to tile, exploring new tiles, interacting with different buildings, and fighting different enemies that you come across in the game, all while building up your deck and trying to complete the objectives for the scenario that you've chosen. Some things I really liked about this game and why I think it's better than any other game on this list is I like that every game is very, very close. Depending on what character you choose and where you go, you have free range to go wherever you want. Every game I've played has been very, very close, down to the last couple of turns to determine whether or not I win or not. It makes the tension kind of constant throughout, as you don't know if you're going to win. The whole kind of game is tense and close. Every turn matters. Every turn has huge impact on how the game plays out. And I like that, the tension is there throughout because it's always going to be close, at least every game that I've played. Another thing I liked is the way that the wounds work. A lot of games, you have maybe 10 health and you take 2 wounds, you're down to 8 health. Big deal. It doesn't really affect the game. You just know you're 2 health closer to 0. In Mage Knight, you're going to be taking wounds directly to your hand, giving you the feeling that you are actually wounded. Because these wounds are going to work against the cards that you can have in your hand, and it's going to make you feel weaker because you can't get as many cards. I thought that was such a good way of doing a wound system, and it worked so well. The amount of asymmetry with each character I thought was really good as well. They all work in a similar way. They're just going to have different upgrades, and 2 cards out of each character are going to be different. But then throughout the game, you kind of choose how the character progresses because you make the choices of what cards to be added to your hand to upgrade your deck over time. I love the freedom to do whatever you wanted in this game, and the replayability is huge because there's a large list of scenarios, and even if you just play the same scenario over and over, the ability to go wherever you want, and the predetermined combat to know if you're going to win or not based on the cards that you played, I thought was really good as well. There's no luck, there's no rolling dice. You're just playing the cards that you have, and you know if you can win the combat before you get to that point. And I love that. It makes the strategies, very much you're in control of the strategies. There's no kind of luck behind that. I also like that there's a day and night mode, so the terrain that you're interacting with is going to be different depending if you're in the day or the nighttime. And then there's also the mana. I thought that was a really cool implementation as well, how they're going to be making certain attacks and abilities stronger depending on mana that you've collected throughout the scenario. So if you haven't played this game, I definitely recommend it. It is such a good game, one I'm constantly going back to over and over, and every game I have enjoyed. It's not one that kind of works well sometimes and doesn't other times. Every game I played of this has been amazing, and that's why it's my number 1 game. So that's my top 10 solo board games as of right now. If you have any game that you think should have been on my list, let me know in the comments down below. I'm always happy to get game recommendations, but as it stands right now, that's my top 10 solo board games. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.